Excellent. Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. We are here in San Francisco on Ramatashaloni land. Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for coming in the rain to support Arielle and Virgie. Thank you to everyone joining us online. Hi online, we appreciate you, we see you. We are here tonight with Arielle Estoria celebrating her book, The Unfolding with Virgie Tovar. Let's give a big hand for both of them. I have very brief business before we get to the heart of the matter this evening. First, please do check out our event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. If you like events like the one you're attending right now, you might like what else we have going on this season. Now is a good time to silence your phones if you haven't already. Feel free to tag us in any photos that you take on social media. We're just at Books on the Park. We would love to see them. We love sharing people's photos that they take at our events. Thank you also for buying copies of our authors' books if you haven't, or if you have, or if you haven't already. We always appreciate it. If you've been here before, you've heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as a local independent bookstore, you also support the author who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you're able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the authors that are joining us tonight. First, Virgie Tovar is an author, activist, and one of the nation's leading experts and lecturers on weight-based discrimination and body image. She's a contributor for Forbes, where she covers the plus-size market and how to end weight discrimination at work. She's the founder of Babe Camp, a self-guided online course designed to help people break up with diet culture. She's also the host of the podcast Rebel Eaters Club and author of You Have the Right to Remain Fat and the Body Positive Journal. She lives here in San Francisco. Let's give another hand for Virgie Tovar. And last but most certainly not least, Arielle Estoria is a poet, speaker, and actor. She's self-published 2 collections of poetry, Vagabonds and Zealots and Write Bloody, Spill Pretty, and has shared her work through spoken word and keynote talks with companies such as Google, Lululemon, Apple, and more. She's emceed conferences such as the Yellow Conference and led writing and self-acceptance workshops. She is here from Los Angeles with her husband, and her book, The Unfolding, An Invitation to Come Home to Yourself, is the reason we're here tonight. So let's give another hand for Arielle.
Hello. Hello. I'm from LA, but my number is 510. So I'm from here. Most of my family is here as well. So I'm excited to be back home.
Oh, I love that. It seemed like there were people with cupcakes, flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Yes, if you would like the best chocolate covered strawberries you've ever had in your life, Sugar Chef Shell. She's also based here. So that was my trip along with the humans that I love.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I love that. I'm so excited to be chatting with you. I always love, I'm like, this is the homage, and there's a million Post-it notes. So I guess we can kind of start really at the beginning, which is what is the unfolding? Yeah. And you kind of talk about 5 phases, and I would love for you to share that.
Yeah, so the unfolding is all the ways that we change, that we grow, that we evolve. I break up what that could look like into these 5 phases, or they're kind of like chapters, they're kind of not, but almost similar to the 5 stages of grief. It's how we experience them, but they're not linear. So when I say the phases, they don't just happen all in that order all at once. They happen all at once sometimes. Maybe there's, so I'll break it down. So it's the awakening, the eclipsing, the illuminating, the mending, and then the returning. And I break down what I experienced in each of those phases and what that looked like, mostly through poetry, because that's how I process the world, that's how I heal, that's how I experience the divine. And so for me, those phases were this awakening moment. I'm realizing, okay, things are shifting, things are shifting in terms of what I believe, in terms of how I believe it. And then there's eclipsing, because we don't talk about how grief-oriented sometimes change is, and how much that can startle and how much that can affect us. And then after we get that eclipsing space, then we're in the illuminating. We shed light onto, okay, what do I want to bring with me? What do I want to leave behind? It's kind of like that phrase, toss the baby out with the bathwater, which I don't know why we had that as a phrase, but it's not tossing flushing out all of the baby and all the bathwater, just some of it, and being able to reintroduce. And I talk about the art of kintsugi, which is the Japanese art of bringing these broken pieces and tying them together with this like glue, this gold glue almost. And so you can see where the pieces have been shattered. Like you can see where it was broken, but that doesn't mean it makes it any less beautiful and any less put together. And then we get into the mending season. We mend, we heal, we process through how we change and how we've evolved. And then we return. We return to ourselves. We return to what I consider my God, the creator. And so, yeah, those are the 5 ages, and the unfolding is just how we change and evolve, which is happening all the time. And I talk about how our cells, like our literal physical cells, are constantly changing. Like right now, the very construct of how we are designed is shifting. That is wild when you think about it. And so I just kind of make name and make kind of this poetic symphony to those changes that happen within us.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I love the idea of kind of poetry being like the soundtrack.
Yes. Oh,
yes. To the changes. Yes. I love that because it's happening. I haven't quite thought of it that way, but you do that in the book, you know? I actually kind of, I wanted to have met your husband earlier. He plays a big role in kind of, he's sort of a catalyst to the unfolding. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so I think it's in probably the awakening chapter. I talk about how meeting my husband kind of allowed this permission and this space to do the unfolding. I had already been doing it. There was little markers. That were showing up in my life leading to that moment, but then it kind of like catapulted, if you will, having the space and the full permission to be able to fully unfold and to fully experience. Like I have been believing and experiencing these things, and now I feel like I have a home in order to hold them. I have a space in order to be it and to be fully myself. And at first it was scary because I'm like, what is happening here, But I also say, like, I didn't meet a man and my whole life changed. It was, things were already changing. And then he came along and I was able to make space and make name to a lot of what I was already experiencing.
I love that. I mean, I think oftentimes relationships have that power to kind of be a container, an incubator, a permission giver. I love that. You kind of use the metaphor of, there's a lot of whispering metaphor. There's a lot of volumes in the book. You kind of go from the loud, which is often it's the easiest to follow. Yeah. And it's the voice that we sometimes have to learn how to turn down if we're gonna let our unfolding. And then you talk about whispers. You talk about this sort of very low volume communication. And I kind of was wondering, I've noticed that kind of, a lot of times when people talk about that voice or that intuition that might lead to like an unfolding, they often talk about it as a quiet voice. Yes. And I'm curious, do you have thoughts on why is that voice that is so much about our purpose? Right. Why is it so quiet?
I think there's, first of all, I love this question. Second of all, I think there's a lot of things that yell at us. Social media yells at us. Television yells at us. Media, entertainment, news, TikTok. We're constantly billboards. Like marketing in itself is built and made to yell at us. Like it's meant to capture our attention and to reel us in. And I think the divine threading of purpose and calling and who we're fully meant to be is not a thing that yells at us. I don't think it's something, I think when I think of like how I experience God and how I experience the divine, it's always in like by a river or like by an ocean. It's these things that are so mighty and so powerful, and yet there's such a shh to it, and that I think there's an inviting and a calming in there, because ultimately I think when we're being called into our purpose and who we're meant to be, I do think that is a beckoning, and beckonings tend to be softer and they tend to elicit peace. And so I think when we realize it's not bringing peace and it's not producing peace, then that's not of God and that's not a purpose, And so I think for me that thin knowing, that discerning, that wisdom, that small whisper or murmur, if you want to call it. I think that's the beckoning. And then I talk a little bit about a roar, you know, that awareness of like, oh, this is the fullness of who I am and how I've been created to be, and walking in that then creates a roar. But the calling and the beckoning to it, I think, is often a whisper. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, I'm thinking about there's a moment that really struck me. There were a lot of moments in the book that really struck me that I really related to. Yeah. One of them is you're asked to give a sermon, and I think it's Mother's Day. Yeah. But you're asked to give the sermon from the grounds.
So I was actually, it's not my story, but it's, it's about my mom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about I wanted to dive into that story. I was hoping maybe you'd share it with folks who haven't read it yet. Yeah. And then also what impact it had on you.
Yeah. So I think growing up, I've learned a lot of the role of women and what that should and should not look like. Right. And the tradition that I grew up in, it was kind of this differentiation on what role women can and cannot have. But I've always been surrounded by women with powerful voices, with wisdom and insight that didn't equate to the roles that they were being given. And so I watched my mom, who is eloquent and wise and such a spirit of just discernment and knowing, and I watched her having to preach from eye level, because that's where women are supposed to be, at eye level. There's not a lot of permission to speak over, and so for me, I think knowing already how many times I'd been on stage at that point, I was going to an arts high school, so I was on stage a lot at that point, and I learned, I was like, oh, this may not fit into where I think I'm gonna go, because I've been on stages and I feel like I'm gonna keep being on stages because I feel like I've been given a voice and a message and things to share with people. And so I think for me, I learned in that moment, I'm like, this might not fit, which hence the little trinkets or the little ripples, I say, or planting, if you will. I'm a plant mom. I've been a plant mom in COVID because we all did weird things and like mid-pandemic, and one of mine was collecting plants. And so that idea of tending and soiling, I just learned like that was a plant, that was a seed, that was like, I might be going in a different direction than I think I've been shown or given the opportunity to see. And so I think that story specifically for me just made me realize, okay, I might be creating and paving a path that might look a little bit differently than that's been laid out before me before.
Yeah, I mean, that's really powerful. I mean, I grew up in the church area in the Bay Area, and my family comes from. You're also the daughter of a pastor, a preacher. I mean, I'm the granddaughter of one. Ooh, so yes. I'm kind of, you talk about, and there was there were a lot of chill moments of like resonance when you talked about stepping away from the role of the daughter that you had stepped into, right? Because like when you think about, like, we're all born into a context, and somebody likely, lots of people have a story about what you're supposed to do and where you're supposed to be. And I think and you're the oldest daughter, right? So that's a very, right? That's such big shoes to fill in that narrative. And you talk about sort of letting go of that. And I'm curious about the process of just and all of it, like the grief, the joy of that decision.
I think it's mostly like realizing like we're always going to be siblings, we're always going to be daughters, we're always going to be like, even when our families and those people that those roles are tied to aren't here, those are things we carry with us all the time, right? So those are always going to be aspects of who we are and who our identity is. But I think for me, it was to a point where I didn't know how to be fully myself in those settings. So I had to kind of like sever a little bit and be like, okay, this is how I exist 99% of the time. And then even my mom, she was like kind of joking because I like got makeup on her coat. So I was like cleaning up. She was like, no, you're Estoria tonight. You're Estoria tonight. And even that grounding and that space and permission to be this person's story is my middle name. And that's the name I carry on most of my poetry and the most of how I write. And so even that permission of like, this is who I am most of the time, and then I result back to the oldest child and the daughter and things like that. And there's healthy ways in order to do that, right? There's ways in order to do that and to still be fully ourselves well in those contexts. And I think for me, I just didn't know how to be fully myself in those contexts. And I'm still learning. I think that's something we're constantly learning. Like I said, the 5 phases is not linear. It happens all over the time, all over, and cyclical. And so I think for me, I'm still learning that, but having more permission and more space to be able to lean into that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning that too. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, and I think that sense, I think one of the things I'm grappling with is sort of, yeah, like you're talking about where it's like that code switching. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of kind of, because you can default into almost this invisibility sometimes, you know, because of the role is so well laid out. Yeah, actually, okay, that's the question I had. Give me 1 second. I've got some other good ones. Oh, okay. This, again, growing up in the church, I really related to. You talk about the sort of spectacle-based aspects of being a Christian, which I think are related to kind of that role. Yeah. And I'm curious if you kind of can talk about, you know, again, that kind of dawning awareness where it's like you grow up in it, so it doesn't really feel, it's not visible, and then it becomes visible, and then you have the moment to be like, do I want to go with this or do I want to not go with this? Yeah,
it's the same concept as, like I said, you know, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Right. A lot of the bathwater is still there, but for me, so much of like my career and how I got started was solely built. Well, it's actually a pretty even mix of like I was in the church, but then I was also like in yoga retreats and like working with these. And so I constantly talk about this idea of a thin space. Like I had a mentor who told me, she was like, you have the ability to do this. And in Genesis, when it says on earth as it is in heaven, it's actually on, which is this. So there's not actually as much of a line as we think there is. So I was doing this over and over and over again until it was finally just like, oh, I sit in both, that I can be a person who identifies as a Christian, as a person of faith, and I don't have to put that everywhere all the time. I went to Israel. That was my last international trip right before COVID. And we got to see the city on the hill, right? The city on the hill that's talked about, and there's a scripture that talks about a hill that's covered in lights. And seeing that for the first time, it wasn't yelling or saying, I'm a city on the hill with a bunch of lights on it. It just was. And I think that gave me so much permission to just be. To operate as a person who feels and identifies as being God-led and God-orchestrated. And I don't have to scream that. It should speak for yourself. And being an artist, learning how you walk in a room and how much that speaks for you before you even open your mouth has really allowed me to obtain that to how I feel like I operate as a person of faith and as a spiritual person. It speaks for me. And sometimes it shows up before even I have the chance to show up. And I just have given permission and space to let that happen and to let that be.
Yes. I mean, I'm thinking, I mean, that I relate to that in the sense of, you know, when something goes from kind of, you know, you're that because you're like doing these, like I've got a checklist. I know I'm this because I checked all these things versus like, you know I am just this.
Yeah. And also I think being in a marriage, being in an intimate relationship has really helped me realize like I preserve and keep so much intimate and sacred into myself. Why do I not do that with my faith? Like, why do I not do that with what I believe? Why do I feel like if I'm able to preserve this as a relationship, then I think I've been able to learn how to preserve this as a relationship. That sometimes it's just for me. That sometimes it's just still waters, you know, and being with God, and I don't have to post about it, you know, or advertise it. It can just be, and it can just be a part of like how I preserve the intimacy of most of my relationships.
I love that. I really like that reframe a lot. Okay, so I've gotten behind again. Okay. Oh yeah. All right. Well, I love one of my favorite moments in the book was this beautiful moment with your body at a new beach, and I was like, can you talk about that moment? How'd you get there? Tell us the story.
On accident. Literally on accident. It was like checking into a hotel, and she was like showing me the map, and then she was like, and then down here is a good beach. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll join you that. Awesome, you know. Go on a hike. Hiking. It's so pretty. We're in the hills. It's gorgeous. Hiking. And then it's like, people go, huh? we wound up here on accident, and I'm sitting there, and I honestly keep most of my clothes on because it still feels weird, but I just sat there and I just started thinking about my body and what it means to have a body and to be at the beach in the sun, and just like all these different moments where it was like I still felt pretty modest in that moment. I still kept majority of my clothes on, and then I had like my little, like, because I like to hike in like layers, so I had like my button up over me a little bit, but just being there and like having the sunset behind me, and I didn't need to like share it or post about it. It was just a moment where I got to be with my body in a way that I don't think ever before, and then I got dressed because nude beaches are kind of strange, and I didn't need to be there for very long, so yeah.
Oh, I love, that's amazing.
Yeah.
There are another really, I think I really loved about the book was you have these, there's not only sort of memoir, there's also poetry, and there's also these sort of almost, pauses for reflection, where you encourage the reader to think about these questions. And I'm curious about the decision to have that in here, and if you have any favorite questions that you really liked putting in there.
So the questions were because I didn't want it to be where people were just reading my story and that was it. I think that's really mute. I think as a poet and as an artist, I've always felt like if people are just coming and they see my outfit and they're like, I like that, or her story was really cool, that resonated, but it like doesn't hit here, like it doesn't affect them, I feel like I'm not doing my job as a creative. And so I wanted there to be a moment where people were, yes, experiencing my own space of unfolding, but I want ultimately that to lead to them being able to discover and experience their own, hence the reflection questions. I feel like my favorites are actually probably closer to the end in, let's see. Yeah, so I've mentioned it a lot already, but this is reflection in the I think the mending section. This is like the ocean for me. What places, activities, or physical representations bring you back to yourself? I think we talk a lot about like you deserve to care for yourself, like you deserve to heal and you deserve, but like we have to believe that first. And so if we can go to the places where you feel like you can connect, where you feel like you can heal, where you feel like peace is ushered into a moment, where are those places for you? Because if you think about within therapy, the first question, if things are arising, they ask you, how are you coping? Like, what do you do to cope? And so I think that question was my bachelor's in psychology. So I like to sneak that in a little bit sometimes. So I'm like essentially asking like, how do you cope when things are bringing things up, when things are being triggered or traumatized? Like, how do you go and center and ground yourself in those moments? And what does that look like for you? And exercising that. Like, I think the artist way, Julia Cameron, she has a lot of like artist activities or artist dates that you take yourself on. And so I think about that. Like, how do we take ourselves on people dates? Like, how do we take ourselves on human dates where we can just like go, connect, be in silence, connect with God and just be in moments where you're just there. And you're learning to like reground yourself, and the ocean was always that for me. Whenever I felt, it was the first thing I did when I got a car. It's like I drove straight to the water just because I could. And so that's always been my place where I can feel the still calm voice of God. So
I love this. Yeah, I mean, for me, I live really close to the ocean on the west side of San Francisco, on the very edge, and sometimes I go there when I'm like, oh right, like I am so little and inconsequential, and whatever I'm feeling is there's just like the scope.
There's so like, much more. Yeah. And you go and you're like, I like what you said, it makes you feel small but not less, if that makes sense. Like you feel a part of it. You feel not expansive with it, but you still feel part of these waves going in and out. And so I think I always think about going there because my problems do feel a lot smaller than I have made them when I go there, but I don't feel less than in the midst of it. And when you're looking on the horizon, it's just like endless. And so I think it reminds me of like there's more here. I'm an Enneagram 4, if anyone is familiar with the Enneagram, and I tend to make a lot of things very dramatized and very, so I have to think, I use the ocean to come back. And probably growing up here is probably why I love the ocean and the beach the most in the winter. Like, bring a blanket, bring the hot chocolate, I will be at the water.
Oh, yes. I remember, re-water, I'm kind of thinking about the first time I ever realized I was at, it was a small lake kind of near Fresno. And it was a small enough lake that really nobody was there but me. And I think the sun was about setting. And I sat on the edge of it and I realized that the waves match my heartbeat. That that's kind of that, the ocean has its own pulsing heart. There's sort of this divinity, there's something really special about that, that there's sort of that mirroring. And that if you, obviously the bigger the body of water, the slower the heartbeat, right? It's just like a blue whale.
I'm pretty sure I have it in here, but I talk about a park that's like up the street from our house. Another thing we did mainly in COVID was just we'd walk everywhere if we could. And we walk up to this park and we were sitting there reading, and then my Apple Watch is telling me to breathe because apparently I forget to do that sometimes. And so I put my book down and I just start breathing. And then as I notice myself breathing, the trees start just rustling. And it's I'm not gonna cry. It's just one of those moments where you're saying, there's just this awareness of this is so much bigger. Things are so much bigger than we make it. And yet I'm part of this. And yeah, I get to be a part of this. And so I think I say, not to say that the trees were moving at my breath. I don't think I'm that powerful, but I do think there was this solidarity moment of I see you, I hear you, I'm with you. And also you're a part of this. And again, I think it whispers. Yeah.
I think that, I feel like it's that call home kind of, right, absolutely. I love that kind of distinction between contextualizing without minimizing. I go to the ocean to remember that my problems are small, but I'm not inconsequential.
Say it again.
Wait, which part?
Conceptual words. I know words.
It might be gone.
Oh, it's gone, but we're gonna play it back somewhere, and I'm gonna
have it.
I'm gonna, So I just need to hear it again.
I love that. Okay, well, so, So, you talk about your relationship to writing as a really big part of your process. And I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well, I think often people are how do you, what's your rhythm? How do you write things? And I don't tend to have this was probably the most rhythm thing I've done, but that was only because there were deadlines and there were other people in the conversation. But for the most part, I refer to writing as spilling, or sometimes they're downloads. I really think a lot of times that I'm writing or spilling, I'm more of it's just this funnel through. It's this vessel type moment, and it happens random. I could be on dates, not so much anymore because I'm married, but before it would be I'd be on dates and little things would trigger. I'd be I'm so sorry, I have to write this down right now. Or in conversations and coffees with friends, or at movie theaters or concerts, and I'll just instantly it's very it's very immediate. It's very ushering, if you will. And I think who is it? Elizabeth Gilbert talks about an idea will come to you and it'll pass you if you don't take ownership of it. And so I always make sure, even if it's just a weird line or a random phrase, or there's no prose to it, I make sure I write it down. And then usually a poem will come in that moment. And the way I've practiced this more is I meet with couples and I'll do their wedding poems. And so I'll meet with them, I'll ask them what their story is, how they met, what they liked about each other, what songs or lyrics or quotes help their relationship together or remind the other. And usually by the end of our 45 minutes to an hour together, I have their poem written for the wedding, because how I'm here, I'm just sharing with you how I heard it. When people are what's your system to. I'm like, my brain just functions that way. There are prose and metaphors and things that I just hear, and I think that's part of like why I say I feel like I have gifts. That is a gift, because I don't feel like I know not everyone operates like that. Yeah. And so I like that. That's part of my gift, being able to express things and then having that return response where people are like, I get a lot like, are you reading my journals? And I'm like, I don't know you. I don't know where you live, so I don't know where your journals are. But I think those are just like heart murmurs and being able to articulate things for people. But it's not much of a process. It's more like, this poem is coming right now, so you better figure out where you're going to put it. Yes.
Ooh, yes. Yeah. I guess I wanted to open up. I'm going to open up in a second to the... Ooh, wait, I might have 2 more questions. Ooh, yeah, okay, yeah. This was a big one. This is actually a big one. You have this beautiful call in one of your poems to be kind to all the past versions of yourself. Yeah. And I was wondering if you could talk about one of the sort of former past versions of yourself that you have a hard time being kind to.
Yeah. Well, being home always reminds me of like who I was as a teenager. And like, I think I have a poem in there where I just talk about like, I had this like best friend in 5th grade, and I kept it fairly quiet. Like, unless I was on stage or doing things that I felt like I could tap into someone else or another character, it was really hard for me to figure out how to be myself. Like, I kind of, the capsule of teenage Ari was a camouflage maxi skirt and a black shirt from Target that I cut a hole right here because it was in the men's section. And it said, "Out of my mind, be back later," and this really aggressive white, which is like the irony of like this and the outfit I'm describing to now this pastel dream. And so for me, like, it was hard to figure out how to be in my body. All my friends were tiny, so I just felt like I was just this, what is it, like the elephant in a tea shop. I just felt like I took up too much space, and I didn't know how to process that. Now I learned I can own that, and I find that that's a part of what makes me me. But that past version of Ari, who just felt so insecure and so not at home in her body or aware of herself, that version still, I say, be kind of all the past versions of yourself, for they are the soil and now which you bloom, right? So that version of me who didn't know who she was or didn't know how to operate in her body became part of the soil, became part of the version of Arielle Estoria that blooms. And even more so, the youngest version of me, like I, as a little girl, my aunt loves to tell this story. I would walk around and like make up songs, make up stories, and I had a whole persona. Her name was Erica Wallace, and I don't know where she got that name. I don't know, but like now it makes me laugh a little bit because I feel like Erica Wallace is this extension of Arielle Estoria. And again, that's my middle name, but I like preserve my last name just for personhood protection a lot of times. So Arielle Estoria is my writer name, it's my pen name, it's still me, and Estoria is actually my grandma, so I'm carrying a lot of generations with me. But even that younger version of myself, I feel like there's a part of her that knew we would get to this point, that knew we were meant to explore and make stories and be this Erica Wallace with a feather boa and a plastic microphone that had the little spring in it. You get like here and plastic clicky heels from the 99-cent store that at that point was still 99 cents and not $2. And so I think all of those versions of myself are now the soil in which I bloom. And I think we get so mad at ourselves for how we didn't know. How we weren't aware, how we did, and I think why? I think there's a part of us that needed to experience that and needed to be that in order to be who we are now. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, these are such important lessons. I just think about, I remember the moment, in my own therapeutic self-help journey where I was like, oh, right, this isn't about kind of throwing away like all the, and I think I used to use the language of like my old self, my former self, and it's like that kind of distancing that I think there's some pressure sometimes to enact. But I love that permission giving of sort of just like seeing that as really rich place from which growth happens. Okay, I'm going to actually transfer it over to the folks in the room who might want to ask any questions or give praise or whatever it is that you'd like to do that's positive or inquisitive. Ooh, thank you.
I love the framing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you connect with the ocean. Is there an ocean or a beach that you would love to visit at some point?
I hear that like the beaches and waters in Greece are like stunning. We really eventually like want to do like a Europe trip at some point in time. So I would love to just experience a beach not in California, but I would say that the beaches in Israel, specifically Tel Aviv, was probably one of the most stunning beaches I've ever like laid eyes on. So I think that opened up my mind to like, I just want to see more. Like I just want that to be a marker of like wherever I go. And that one we got to stay like on a hotel, like on the water. So it's literally like you walk out the hotel, there's like a little patch of cement, and then there's the beach. So anything that's accessible, please, I want it. Yeah. Great question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I feel like I want to ask, as you're like changing, I guess you should say, and it's not something you're used to, and you're surrounded by people who like really depend on you. How do you navigate expressing like, I'm not the me that you're used to, and this is kind of where I am now, and this is like what I need. Yeah,
I think you just have to like, it's about learning how to express it as much as possible. I feel like the best probably book for this is actually Virgie Tovar, which is a book called Boundaries. And I think also acknowledging that like as we're experiencing these changes and things like that, and there's grief for us, there's also grief for the people who are acknowledging like, you're not who I thought you were, so like give me a second, you know, to catch up, and finding grace for that and also grace for yourself. And I think only it really needs to be a conversation if it comes up in terms of like, you're not seeing me and I just need to articulate ways where you can help better see me, and do with that with what you will, you know. But I think giving space what's the other word? Giving space and opportunities for you to continue showing up as that person and as that full self, so that, you know, the rest of you will be like, okay, I'm getting used to this, you know, like I'm getting reacquainted, I'm re-meeting you. And when we think about like what it's like to re-meet someone, like I met Virgie for the first time today, you know, and we're like, hey, we're like, oh, I like this, you know, and we get reacquainted. And how often does that need to happen with people in our lives that we've known forever? Sometimes we got it like, oh, you like that now? Okay. I didn't know that, but okay, you know, and just learning. And I think that's something I've learned also just being in an intimate relationship. I'm like, I want to learn about him all the time. Like, I don't never want to feel like I just know everything. Yeah. Give grace for yourself and grace for the person and the people around you. Yeah.
I have a question. I apologize, I haven't had a chance to read the book, but when you start, like, you know, you're feeling, you talked about the flip-flopping, like, or, you know, going back and forth between the spaces, but like when you are, like, you realize, like, oh, this other space is the one I really want to be in most, like, how did you kind of work through the, like, maybe, like, pain points or, like, frustration, or just, like, I see where I want to go, but I don't exactly know how to get there, and I, like, feel frustrated about where I'm at and where I want to go.
I feel like I've always been a person that just like slowly builds. I think being an artist and being a creative like has kind of helped me pivot and figure that out. And so I think for me, like, I've never been a huge, like, I'm going to plan my dreams out and this is my 5 years. I have a partner who can do all those little details. I'm just like, I'm in the moment, you know, like I think about next week, maybe. And so I think for me, I've always just been like such a one step after the other kind of person. And I think that also can apply to us as we're realizing like, this is where I want to go. And in a lot of like acting training and they say, what is the first step? Like when you're making goals, when you're making habits, like, so the goal is I'm going to run a marathon next year. I am not running any kind of marathons ever, but if I were to run a marathon, what would be the first step? The first step is not running a marathon. The first step is training. How do I train first? Okay, let me look up some apps. Let me see if other people are doing this. And so I think taking it, breaking it down, like we give ourselves too much to process at one time. So break it down. Where is it that I see myself? Like I think having my having my book, there was an opportunity where there were, you know, I've always written and I'd self-published, but for me, I'm like, that would be a goal, you know, to be able to have a book that's published. So what do? I just keep writing, you know, I just keep hoping that those opportunities show up, and I am learning now how to be better at networking myself and putting myself out there. So a lot of times we got to do that work of like, you got to put yourself out there. You got to talk all the great things. You got to build the resume. And I think we, especially as women, have a hard time doing that because we're like, ooh, I don't want to brag, you know, like I don't want to cop off to, but I'm like, I have a pretty phenomenal resume and I'm okay I can say that, you know. And so I think also making the steps small for yourself, breaking it down, putting yourself out there, and then also like take your time, you know. Like I think we rush so much, and we live in a world that's like, it's just go all the time. Take your time. If you've seen Ant-Man, that was great. But Kang, one of the actors, he's like this, you know, he's the person who goes in and out of the multiverse. I've been thinking about it ever since. He says, time is not what you think it is. So I think when we like alleviate that pressure, then I think we allow ourselves a lot more space to just go at the pace in which makes sense for us and not the pace of everyone around us. Yeah. Great question.
All right, I want to ask something.
Yes. Hi, Katie.
You know, I just think that the book turned out so beautifully. Your talent just shines off the pages. And what I want to hear you read a poem.
Okay.
But I'm going to let you choose. And I want either it to be one that was kind of core as you were conceptualizing what you wanted the book to be, that you kind of kept coming back to, this is one that's going to be central to it, or one that surprised you as you got to the end and either it snuck in there or we added it toward the end or whatever.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear one of those.
I love that you're answering this question when this is probably the person who's been in this book the most because she's my editor.
I'm biased.
Yes, I'm like, but now I kind of want to hear what poem you are thinking.
Now I have to hand me the book and I can find one.
Okay, what poem you are thinking of? Sometimes though, honestly, coming back to this, I'm like, I wrote this. Who wrote this? Oh, I feel like we have, okay. Maybe this one actually. This one I did not expect to put in here. There was this exhibit at the Broad, which is in Los Angeles. And when you walk into the room, there's all these musicians in different rooms. And then eventually they start to circle into all one room. So you're like hearing this person on a guitar in one video, and then you're hearing a person sing, and then all of a sudden they leave the room they're in and they enter into the same room. And I sat on the floor at this exhibit because it's happening so slowly. You kind of have to sit there in a few times in order to get the whole thing. And so I sat there, and then obviously I wrote this poem while in the exhibit. But I think this poem reminds me that like, I'm gonna read it. The same song. I once saw an art exhibit at the Broad called The Visitors. In it, screens showed 12 different artists, all singing the same song, each playing different instruments, their voices all melting together, creating the most beautiful echo, their voices rising into a marvelous catastrophe of sound, colliding together in the center of the room as slowly each screen began to empty, the sound began to fade, and I watched them enter into the same room, their bare feet, a piano playing, their guitars strumming, each of their ballads tiptoeing around each other. Watching this, I wondered if humanity could be like this one day. If we could all be singing the same song in different rooms, but find our differences would not be so different after all. If we listened closely, could we find that the melody has always been the same? Would we find that the blood running through our veins has always flowed the same? If we remember that the breath in our lungs has sometimes carried the rhythm same at one time, I wonder if we strip down the skin, would we find that our bones are all the same color, that our insides all bleed red and pulse alive? If we realized after all this time, we never knew we were singing the same song in the same house, just in different rooms. I wonder what would happen if we turned the lights on, if we would finally see each other, finally hear the melody has been the same all along. Yeah. I think that's the poem I would encapsulate, just because it's talking again about like, yeah, this is like part of my story, you know, but ultimately I want it to be about a collective story. I want it to be about a collective happening. I want it to be about a collective belonging and a collective permission slip, if you will. So I think of that idea of just all of us in the same house, but in different rooms. There's just something really powerful about that. Yeah.
No, this is cool. That was the response. Sorry.
No response.
Actually, as you're doing that, I love that you brought the element of the breath and how that ties through the whole book. Breath is in that poem, and then breath turns into song. It turns into collective song.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful how that comes together in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Katie.
Anyone else?
Who's one of your favorite authors?
Everyone who endorsed this book, to be completely honest, that was probably the wildest part, is having people who I've looked up to, admired, from propaganda to Glennon Doyle to all these people who have been such pivotal parts of me becoming an artist, and then for them to speak over like my words were just a gift. So everyone on this, yeah, I've been trying to read more plays. So Nozaki Shang is like incredible. Who else? I'm reading a handful of books right now. So I don't know if I have a favorite. I have a hard time choosing just one. I have a collective favorites. So yeah, and then yeah. We'll let that be my answer.
So you know what? I really mentioned your favorite poet. To be fair.
Okay. My favorite poet. I feel like I'm a little biased on this because most of my favorite poets are my friends. Ryan Oliva's Super B poetry is his poetry. I love Sarah Kay. She's based in New York, and she was like one of the first spoken word poets that I kind of witnessed. Obviously, Maya has a few poems as well. Gotta give credits to the Angelou. Yeah. Again, I just like taking in people's artistry, and I have a hard time being like, that's a favorite, when I'm like, I love it all. But those are the first that come to mind. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I mean, if there's, did you have something?
I was gonna, yeah.
Go
I was
for
just,
it.
what was your biggest lesson in like putting all of this together and creating this book?
My biggest lesson, I feel like I should break it. My biggest lesson as a writer was to allow myself to literally unfold, allow myself to peel back the layers, allow myself to go there. I think my biggest lesson as a person was that life unfolds so beautifully in so many different ways, and I want to not document everything in the same way, but I think I want to mark those moments as best I can. And then my biggest lesson, I think ultimately was like more of a phrase, which is the yes and. That's like a big improv exercise. It's like, yes, this can be real, and also in improv, you can't say no to something, you know, like you can't be like, no, the moon is not falling from the sky. You have to say yes. And isn't it glorious? You know, so I think my biggest lesson was like, yes, and like the conversation is so much more expansive, and that there's so much more to the story than I think we even have the eyes to see sometimes. Yeah. Great question.
Oh, amazing. Well, with that, we're gonna close. Can we do one more round of applause? This was such a pleasure getting to talk with you and see the book. There are going to be books for sale, and you will probably sign them.
Probably,
right?
yes. That is requested.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for writing.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for saying yes to being a part of this. I'm really thankful. So, and thank you to Green Apple Books. This is really fun. Thank you. Yay. Thank you to everyone online.
Oh,
Oh, you're not done clapping yet? One more time. Thank you both so much for sharing your time and talent. I'm so appreciative. Thank you all for joining us when, weathering the storm and being here. It's so special that y'all showed up. I so appreciate it. I am going to have, Arielle, would you like to sign here? Or would you like to, okay, so you can come to her. We have copies of her book at the front. You can find them there, and then you can come back here. And we also have other books. Take a look at them if you want. And make yourselves comfortable, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.